I'm the director of the National Reentry Resource Center. Before we begin, I'd like to talk through a couple of housekeeping items about how this webinar is going to work. If you encounter a technical or audio problem during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues you may not be able to resolve. For this reason, we are recording this event and we'll post it on our website at www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. Once the webinar is posted, we will email you the link for the recording. Again, welcome to the webinar. We appreciate you joining to learn more about how to best promote your efforts during Second Chance Month and utilize some of the resources we've recently offered. This is a joint webinar between the National Reentry Resource Center, the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and JustLeadershipUSA. I'm happy to be joined by Deanna Hoskins, President and CEO of JustLeadershipUSA, and Michael Clark, Director of Communications and External Affairs at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Today is a special day for us here at the National Reentry Resource Center because unlike past webinars we posted that really drill down into research and evidence-based practices to help inform the work that you're doing on the front lines, today we're specifically talking about ways you can amplify those efforts to raise awareness locally, regionally, and nationally. We're going to talk about Second Chance Month and how it provides a platform for that kind of promotion, how the partnership between our organizations has been promoting your efforts over the past 2 weeks. We're going to walk through some of the tools that you have available so you can get involved. We'll also leave time for Q&A. So at any time during this webinar, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We briefly want to give everyone a quick download of who is supporting and conducting this webinar today. First, this webinar is being powered by the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance, which provides leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. Much of BJ's reentry work is made possible through the Second Chance Act, federal legislation passed in April 2008 that provides grants to support state, local, and tribal government agencies and nonprofits in their work to reduce recidivism and improve outcomes for people returning from incarceration. To date, the Second Chance Act has supported more than $400 million in reentry investments across the country. That funding has benefited more than 900 grant awards for programs designed to provide reentry services to adults and juveniles. As a result, more than 164,000 people returning to their communities after incarceration have participated in Second Chance Act supported programs. The Second Chance Act also helped establish the National Reentry Resource Center, which provides technical assistance and training to Second Chance Act grantees. The Council of State Governments Justice Center, which oversees the National Reentry Resource Center, is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We're a membership organization that represents state officials in all 3 branches of government and combines that power with the policy and research expertise to help increase public safety and strengthen communities. Now I'm going to turn it over to Deanna. Deanna?
JustLeadershipUSA. JLUSA's mission is we are a leading nonprofit organization dedicated to cutting the U.S. correctional population in half by 2030. JLUSA empowers people most affected by incarceration to drive policy reform. The 3 pillars of our work are leadership, advocacy, and membership. JLUSA invests directly in the leadership of those most impacted by the criminal justice system through our Leading with Convictions and Emerging Leaders training. We also work on advocacy issues such as our Working Futures campaign, which directly relates to the Second Chance Act and getting people most impacted returning to their community the ability to go to work, find housing, and other opportunities. And now I want to pass it over to Nicole.
Nicole, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry. Second Chance Month creates a national opening for us to amplify the importance of reentry by telling the individual stories of our work and our experiences. For the Second Chance Act grantees and the reentry practitioners joining us, this is an opportunity to build local champions for your work by demonstrating the challenges we face and how you're working to address them. So I'm going to turn it to Deanna to talk about the importance of Second Chance Month to people with lived experience.
Nicole. When you talk about second chances and having an opportunity to reintegrate after a period of incarceration or removal from the community, is making sure that basic human needs of an individual is being met. Those basic human needs being housing, food, clothing, but also having the ability to become employed, utilize some skills to become a self-sufficient individual in the community. It's important for individuals on this call who are possibly grassroots organizations, people who are actually trying to navigate the criminal justice system and the reentry system themselves, to understand when we talk about reentry, how it's focusing on a process of making sure a person is successful versus actually creating another program to instill some of those traits. So for us, individuals with people with lived experience, reentry is one of the most important keys of transitioning back into the community. And I'll pass it back to Nicole.
Sure. I think I can pick it up from there. Thank you, Deanna, and thanks so much to Just Leadership for being here. This is Michael Clark. I'm with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Thank you to everyone taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us. Just building off of what Nicole and Deanna were mentioning earlier about the importance of Second Chance Month, I also wanted to point out that while this month is a key time to amplify the issue and your efforts, I think it also creates an opportunity to get more comfortable with promoting your work in general so that you might continue in those types of efforts as the year goes on. So while we're talking about efforts around Second Chance Month for this webinar and this month, I'd also think about some of these tactics that you're going to hear about in a broader sense going forward. So back to Second Chance Month, we've really seen a lot of activity in the past 2.5 weeks. Hashtag Second Chance Month and hashtag Reentry Matters have been trending on social media. We saw the White House again proclaim April as Second Chance Month, and dozens of events led by advocates and our own Second Chance Act grantees have been popping up all over the country. And we've tried to document some of those at our website, CSGJusticeCenter.org. If you know about an event or if you're having an event, it's not too late to let us know about it, and we'll make sure to put it on the public schedule we have running there. So with all of this activity happening across the country, we wanted to help you get in on the action, really. As many of you know, we previously provided some tools to help get you started, including a social media toolkit, a templated press release, and media advisory, and a template for a letter to your local editor. Now, if you don't have these tools, don't worry about that. We're going to be walking through each of them here, and my colleague, Bo, is going to be chat messaging the links as we reach each resource. So let's start with the let's start with the social media toolkit, as this is the space that we're naturally seeing most activity daily. The toolkit we provided is really meant to get you started. Some of you may be savvy tweeters and Facebookers, and for others, this may be the first time you're considering posting something on social media. And so what we tried to provide you is a starting point with some language that fits into some of the core messaging we've been promoting throughout the month. One key aspect of that framing is the conversation that jointly the NRRC, the CSG Justice Center, and JustLeadershipUSA has tried to frame from the start of our partnership this month, posing the question, what does reentry mean to you? Because it's such a broad question, we thought it was a good way to frame some of your messages and allowing you personally to find your space within that question. So we've seen already this month people talk about how reentry to them means, for instance, support from an individual in their family, because when they personally reentered society, it was a family member that got them through that challenging period. Meanwhile, others have talked about successful reentry meaning, for instance, specific types of job training inside correctional facilities, which creates a way to potentially talk about a certain program or type of work they're engaged in. And so there's a lot of room within that question to work and make this your own. And then, as we mentioned before, we've worked to establish these two hashtags, Reentry Matters and Second Chance Month, as central to the online discussion. So while you're hopefully tweeting and Facebooking, just be sure to be tagging them, those two hashtags in your messages when you can. And because Twitter specifically has word limits on each message, we'd advise you to, when possible, you should try to work those phrases into actual sentences where it makes sense. So a few other things to keep in mind while you're considering using this toolkit. One, to be clear, this is not a script. You'll see in the document that we've highlighted areas in the text, and some of those sections are highlighted because there's a placeholder that needs to be filled in, like the name of your organization or your Twitter handle, and others are highlighted as language that you may want to consider customizing. You are totally welcome to use this language as it is, and we understand that you guys are certainly busy, so that might be the easiest thing to do. But you should also feel comfortable making it more personalized to reflect and reflective of yourself and or your work. Images and video really help with engagement on social media. You'll see on the right of the template messages we've provided is a link to a social media slide that has different corresponding messages attached to it that go along with the central framing of what reentry really means. But you should also think about whether or not there are any pictures you have or even pictures you could potentially take to help complement your message. Or, for instance, could your message also work as a selfie video on your phone telling the world what reentry means to you? Again, none of that is required, but it's the kind of content that can help boost your messages and make sure they're seen by as many people as possible. And also, just a disclaimer here or warning, for folks that are joining us from organizations or government agencies, that you should be mindful of any current policies your employer has about posting messages about your work on social media. We don't see this as a problem very often, but it might be worth just double checking that. We've also provided template press releases and media advisories, and we've set these up in a similar way to the social media toolkit, highlighting the information that needs to be filled in about your specific work or efforts. So briefly, for those who haven't published a press release before, you want to think about this as a news story you're writing. The most successful press releases are based in news. So maybe it's a release where you're sharing data about the program you're operating to convey success, or you're holding an event for Second Chance Month with a discussion planned about a specific aspect of reentry you're focused on, or you're announcing a change in your program or new funding for your program. Whatever the news is, you'll want to deliver that news clearly and concisely at the top of the press release. Now again, because we don't know the information or announcements you might potentially be able to make, we had to keep our template pretty general and assume your announcements would be related to an event or a commemoration of Second Chance Month. So you'll see that reflected in the template. But if you have other ways of talking about your work, its impact, its importance, or the issue in general, you should think about how to make those efforts stand out. And you can always use Second Chance Month as an added anchor for why you're sharing this information now. Now, most news organizations have a standard email address or submission form you can send announcements to, which is fine to do that, but the best way to connect to news organizations is actually taking the time to find local reporters that are covering the issues related to your work. And this does require a little bit of a time investment, but there are some reporters that strictly cover criminal justice. But you also may want to think about, say, health reporters, if your work is related to behavioral health treatment or issues, or labor reporters if your work is related to employing people with criminal records. And most local newspapers, if you can't find those sort of specialty reporters, most local newspapers have journalists assigned to individual towns and cities. So knowing who those reporters are and researching how to reach them will cut through some of the rungs at the news organization you're reaching out to and get you to the person that would ultimately be covering your announcement. I should mention also that Twitter is also a good way of perusing certain beats that reporters have. They're usually mentioned in their descriptions of themselves. So it's another helpful place to search. Also, with press releases and media advisories, these should really be sent formally on behalf of your organization. So you'll want to make certain that you're developing these and sharing them with the consent of whoever leads your organization or agency. Now, a media advisory acts very much like a press release, but in a much more condensed way. And they're typically only used for event announcements and serve as a reminder of an event you may have already reached out about. So typically, if you have an event you're promoting, you could send a press release maybe a week or so before the event for potential coverage of that announcement, and then you'd follow that announcement with a media advisory much closer to the event, usually the day before, and simply providing the who, what, where of what's coming up. Now, if you've found a specific reporter to share these with, you should pass them along to him or her. But they should also be shared with any general announcement email addresses your local newspapers have set up. Those should make their way to an assignment editor who can also determine, based on the news of the day, if it's something they want to put a reporter on a reporter's schedule. And in terms of finding these types of general inboxes, I'm referencing a simple Google search for the publication and announcement submission should get you where you want to be. And finally, the last tool here is we've created a customizable letter to the editor, which typically run in the opinion section of your local newspaper. Now, these letters, while brief, are a really great way to get your unfiltered message out to the public. And also, one key audience you could reach with a letter to the editor are your local, state, and even federal politicians. Elected officials and their staff typically scan letters to the editor sections of local newspapers as a way of keeping in touch with their constituents and their views. These letters typically run between 150 and 175 words. And if you want to avoid being edited too heavily, they'll definitely max out at about 250 words. And unlike how we were guiding you in terms of sharing your press release, general email addresses or submission forms on a news organization's website are designed specifically to receive these types of letters, and they're a reliable way to get your submission considered and ultimately published. So those are the tools that you have in front of you. Again, want to reinforce the main hashtag we're using, hashtag Reentry Matters, and encourage all of you to think about engaging on social media. I do want to say that we also know how busy you all are, and so we really appreciate you simply considering to engage in this way. We know it ends up being additional work for you on top of the great work you're already doing. So even for taking the time today, we just really appreciate you considering it. And I think with that, unless Deanna or Nicole have anything to add, we can jump in any questions anyone might have. So we're not seeing any questions coming up yet, but just want to encourage you all to use that chat box if you have any questions about, again, any of the materials or tactics in using them and promoting your work. So I see that there's a question coming up asking about how to receive the toolkit. Within the chat, and I think we could probably, Bo, we could probably post them all together. There are individual, even though we're referring to a toolkit, there are individual links for each tool we're talking about. And so Bo, I believe, has been posting those as we went through the webinar, but she can post the full slate of them all together here so you can access them. We'll also be sending out an email following this webinar so that everybody can access them, and we'll be sending that soon. Nicole, I'm seeing there's a question about whether there are any funding opportunities out there. I don't know if you want to.
Yes, there are. We are entering this new phase right now, and there will be new Second Chance Act solicitations. There's actually one out right now around adult community-based reentry that's geared towards nonprofits. So please, you can check that out on our website, the National Reentry Resource Center. And we do encourage all of you to apply. And so they'll be released. We have one coming out soon focused on people with, serving people with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. We have ones that are geared towards people on supervision. So there's a number of different types of grant opportunities that will be rolled out in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all for your questions. They're coming in hot and heavy now. So I know somebody was asking about how they might be able to highlight some work in Long Island related to social media. Again, if you consult the social media toolkit that we've been posting the link to in the chat function on the webinar, you'll see some guidance in that toolkit for how you might be able to construct some messages. But the key element here, and again, participating on social media can purely be you writing up your own messages and not necessarily using the language that we've provided. But the key element here is incorporating the necessary hashtags. And we would say, just based on the conversation that's been happening thus far this month, that you're really going to want to incorporate hashtag Reentry Matters and hashtag Second Chance Month in those messages. And just to be clear, there's another question about whether or not these hashtags are specific to Second Chance Act grantees. No, they are not. These are just hashtags that have either already been established or hashtags, particularly with Reentry Matters, that the National Reentry Resource Center and JLUSA and CSG Justice Center have been trying to develop, and has actually kind of taken off since we started in April. So these are hashtags that the conversation is already happening, but it's certainly open to anybody that wants to use them, and we encourage you to do so. Deanna, there's a question here outside of the hashtags about how national organizations like CSG and like JLUSA can endorse or support local Second Chance Month events. The one thing I would flag with that, and then you may have other thoughts, but in the press release template that we shared, JLUSA, Deanna Hoskins is, JLUSA's own Deanna Hoskins is quoted, as is the NRRC, in supporting Second Chance Month efforts overall. So by using that template and the access you have to these pre-approved quotes, there is an element of endorsement there. Any additional thoughts?
Anything further, I would say, needs to be submitted to our comms department at JLUSA, and our comms department will work with your team to actually make sure that the quote and what we're endorsing is actually falling in line with JLUSA's mission, but also the overall mission of Second Chance Month as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. Go to our website, JustLeadershipUSA.org, to connect with some of our team and send them a message and how to partner with us and get some of that information out.
Sorry, I'm just going through some of these questions. I know some of them don't specifically relate to the topic at hand, so I am sort of funneling through some of these, and I think we can think about how we might be able to get additional information to you all for some of the less relevant questions. But there's a question here asking about formerly incarcerated women having graduated from a leadership program. Can you highlight their stories and then use the hashtag for this month? Absolutely, and I'm sure Deanna can attest to this. Personal stories about success in reentry or about challenges in reentry are just really strong ways to get your message across. So I would definitely reinforce that in your messaging as I'm sure you're much more qualified to talk about that than I am. Yeah.
So personal stories are definitely how you change hearts and minds when you're talking about criminal justice efforts locally, especially focusing on criminal justice policy and getting policymakers to move. So definitely highlighting individuals' triumphs, their story, and how they've overcome, or sometimes just highlighting the need and how people are most in need when they come to your area. Definitely are ways you want to get those stories out, and the hashtag should be attached to that as well. So don't ever hesitate to highlight stories.
There's a question about whether our organizations collectively are holding any events in which we might be able to collaborate with one of the participants or potentially meet and network, I would imagine. Most of speaking from CSG's standpoint and from NRRC's, most of the activities that we're doing, at least during Second Chance Month, have mostly been sort of remote and digital. Deanna, I don't know if there's anything that JLUSA has coming up that might be an opportunity for folks to attend or anything like that you wanted to flag.
So we actually, if you go to our events page on our website, we highlight the events that our various leaders are doing across the country to participate in. But if you're yourself is having an event and will want Just Leadership to participate, we definitely can connect you with leaders that have went through our training that are connected to Just Leadership that may be in your area to come out and support, but also just to be able to connect you with that leader so you can start building your network of leaders across the country.
There's a question, I'm trying to make sure I understand it. There's a question about for state agencies that have their own public information officer, what recommendations there might be on how to utilize the toolkit to work with PIOs. If this is coming from somebody who isn't a PIO and is looking to sort of engage their public information officer, I do know, from speaking with corrections PIOs, for instance, that they are overwhelmed with a lot of work. And so I would just recommend making sure that they're aware of this toolkit, just like we were trying to consider for sharing with you all, because this isn't necessarily your area of work in terms of, knowing how to promote the great work that you're doing. PIOs just have a lot going on as well. And so this might be a way to not only cut through some of that and give them a head start, like we were hoping to do with you all, but also make sure that they're aware that, that this Awareness Month is happening and that there are ways to promote, good work and proactive work.
And also, when you're dealing with PIOs at a state or local level within government or even organizations, actually working with them and having them understand that the communication methods may not fit into the traditional box of how government operates to send out communications, that there is a different approach when you're talking about connecting on the ground and elevating the stories on the ground. So part of that comes from the relationship and building it up with the PIO, that this is a different concept, and even going a step further to possibly the commissioner or whoever's office that PIO is in to getting approval that this is a different approach because this is trying to hit a grassroots level.
There was another question earlier that I missed, but it's a great question, and one that I think plagues anybody trying to build a Twitter following is how to generate a return on Twitter followers. It's a great question. You will never fully get there, but I would say that, and this is something that people often fall into, is you want to generate content and you want to start discussions, but a lot of times it can take the form unintentionally of just speaking outward and almost lecturing people on Twitter and Facebook, as opposed to thinking about the messages you're sharing in a way that might elicit a response, asking questions, trying to think about the messages that you're sharing as though you're trying to build your own little community. And the way to do that is not necessarily talking at people. I mean, sharing those messages, sharing those announcements, sharing the good work you're doing is important for a bunch of different reasons. But trying to lace in ways that you might be able to truly communicate with people across Twitter, I think is an important way to go about it. There's also a question here about sharing your own personal story regarding reentry struggles and successes, and whether or not you can do that using the hashtag. You absolutely can. We absolutely, to the extent that you're comfortable sharing your personal story, and that goes to personal stories about reentry, which I think is where this participant is coming from, but also practitioners and people that run programs also have personal stories, and we want to hear about those too. Why you do this work, why it's important to you, how you got here in the first place, what led you to the work that you're doing. But the hashtags that we provided certainly have no limitations. It's just a way to join the conversation, and again, the chief among them is contributing your own personal story.
And I just want to follow up to that sometimes the hardest person to compliment or elevate is yourself, but also recognizing and owning your greatness is what we say at Just Leadership. So actually sharing that and actually being recognized for the great work and investment that you do that is actually benefiting the community and the participants in your program to have that opportunity of a second chance.
I think we're going to wrap up in a moment, but Nicole, if you're willing, there's a few more questions that have come in, and I think it might be folks that may have joined in late. There's a few more requests for just funding opportunities in general. Would you mind terribly doing a quick run through of your spiel on that one more time?
Yes, no problem. So Right now, Department of Justice, BJA, is releasing a new round of solicitations for Second Chance Act grants. So there will be several different types of grants that are released. There is one out right now geared towards adult community-based reentry. Nonprofits are eligible to apply, and so I encourage you to either check out the solicitation either on BJA's website, or you can go to the National Reentry Resource Center and look at the solicitation there. And there's a number of different categories of grant programs that will be released. And so there's one specific towards people with co-occurring disorders. There's another one that is specific to people on supervision. And there's a lot of great latitude there. I encourage you to apply, look through the solicitation, and think about getting your foot into the game and thinking smartly about the partners out there. We at the National Reentry Resource Center, for every adult solicitation around SCA, we do a webinar, and so we will host a webinar and talk with co-host with the Department of Justice, BJA, and answer questions that you may have and discuss expectations, and encourage you to check out those as well.
Thanks for that, Nicole. I appreciate it. And one final question I have here, somebody saying that this webinar was very helpful, so I appreciate that. But wondering how we're going to use the collection of reentry events that are being shared with us, and asking whether it will be reported to some of the federal agencies, that sort of thing. So one, as we mentioned earlier, the CSGJusticeCenter.org or CSGJusticeCenter.org, maybe we could post that link there too, has been keeping a running sort of tally of the different events that we've been notified about since before reentry, since before Second Chance Month began. So you can find that at our website, and that is also something that we are sharing with our colleagues at DOJ, as well as some of the other activities that we're seeing. So it won't be compiled in a press release, I don't think, but we are certainly promoting it on our website. We are promoting them through our channels on social media, and we are also flagging them at DOJ. So thank you all again for joining. I just want to flag a PDF of this webinar will be available in the next day or so. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be sending out an email soon, just circling back and providing you a one-stop kind of email where you can access the tools that we've been talking about. But again, links to all of these tools are incorporated in the chat function of this webinar, so you can grab those there, but we'll also be circling back, so keep an eye out for that email. And thank you so much again for everyone who's joined. Thank you, Dr. Nicole Jarrett and Deanna Hoskins, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.